know more about your visit here as a special reporter on the situation, human rights in Myanmar. So how do you bring the situation here in Indonesia?
Well, as my title implies, I'm a special rapporteur. So I'm reporting on the conditions of human rights in Myanmar and the consequences of those conditions. The conditions for human rights in Myanmar is just horrific, and they're getting worse. Thousands of people have been killed, innocent civilians have been killed, over 3,000. There are 19,000 political prisoners behind bars in Myanmar right now. It is a crime to criticize the junta. It is a crime to practice your profession, to be a journalist in many respects in Myanmar. Over 60,000 homes, churches, mosques, temples, clinics, schools have been destroyed, have been burned to the ground. 1.6 million people have been internally displaced. Many more have crossed the border into neighboring countries and into off to the sea. So this is a catastrophe that is getting worse by the day.
Okay, you have data. It is horrible. It's catastrophic. 1.6 million people displaced because of this situation.
Yes.
So, but your visit here in Indonesia, we meet with the stakeholders, ministries. Tell us more about the visit here and what are the results of the meeting with them.
Well, I'm having a very, very enlightening visit for myself. First of all, it's important for me to hear the perspectives, the points of view of those in the government, of those in human rights organizations, of those providing humanitarian aid. And then I've had the opportunity to go to Aceh and PD to meet with refugees that began by leaving Myanmar because of genocidal attacks on them. They went over the border into Bangladesh. They found themselves in the largest refugee camp in the world, over 1 million. And conditions in those camps continue to deteriorate. So it was very important for me to meet with people who literally ran for their lives, put their family and their lives in the hands of smugglers so that they could have a chance, have a hope to survive these conditions. And they took to the sea and they found themselves here. So it was so important to hear why they left, how they left, the journey that they took, and then their conditions right here in Indonesia.
So the bottom line is we have to recognize first the real situation there in order to have the solution. So speaking of that situation, now Indonesia is hosting the ASEAN Chairmanship 2023, where the conflict of Myanmar is one of the most important things. Our president also said at the first press conference in the Labuan Bajo to progress the 5-point consensus, right? So how do you see so far about Indonesia's approachment to address this conflict?
Well, first of all, the government of Indonesia has taken the initiative to, first of all, develop the 5-point consensus. There was an emergency in Myanmar. The coup occurred. The president initiated talks that led to an emergency meeting here in Jakarta to address the crisis. The senior general, Min Aung Hlaing from Myanmar, was invited, not as a head of state, but as the senior general from Myanmar, to address the crisis. Now, it was here in Jakarta that the 5-point consensus was developed. And it was here that Min Aung Hlaing, the head of the junta, agreed with the 5-point consensus, including point 1, which was cease the violence. The ink on the agreement was barely dry when Min Aung Hlaing was on a plane, flew back to Myanmar, and declared that, well, these points are really mere suggestions. And I may or may not get to them when perhaps there's more stability in Myanmar. So his response from the very beginning to the 5-point consensus was cynical, disrespectful, and manipulative. And that has been the key to the lack of progress with the 5-point consensus. The junta not only is contradicting and double-crossing the leaders of ASEAN with respect to the 5-point consensus, but he's escalating the violence against the people of Myanmar. He's attacking them with helicopter gunships, with jet fighters dropping bombs. So the situation is getting worse because the violence is getting worse. And for them, that is the junta, control over Myanmar is much more precarious. They're in a weaker and weaker position because of the very strong, very deep opposition to them from the people of Myanmar.
The real fact that we are facing right now in Indonesia is refugees are coming where they were spending weeks, even a month from Myanmar to here in Indonesia to have the safe place. And the last year we received, there were more than 60 refugees are arrived in Indonesia and PD Aceh, and you did also visit there. We would like to know more. What are the real situation there? What will you bring by looking at them in the field in real? And how do you see about, they are now stranded. They are living in the limbo. They don't have future. Even they cannot come back to their country because the country is not giving them any future. Right. So yes. How do you see about that?
And that point is, I think, critical. Let's start with where this all started, because that ultimately is where the solution is. Myanmar. The Rohingya living in Myanmar, in Rakhine State, were victims of genocide, of genocidal attacks by the Myanmar military that drove them over the border into Bangladesh. Now they're in the largest refugee camp in the world. Conditions there are bad and they're getting worse. 41% of Rohingya children have stunted growth.
Yes.
More than half of them are anemic, as are breastfeeding women and pregnant women. This is a disaster. And the supply of food rations for these refugees is actually going down. The World Food Program cut food rations by 17% in March. They were forced to cut food rations again this month in June by an additional 20%. And right now, if you're a Rohingya refugee in these camps, you have to figure out a way to survive on 27 cents per day. Okay. I talk to people that are in these camps facing these situations. I've had mothers describe to me the impossible choice of deciding what they are not going to feed their children because of just the lack of money. And I've been told by them that it's not just a matter of hunger and malnutrition. These cuts are creating increased tension in the camps, increased violence in the camps, and increased reasons why people want to get out of the camps. There was a 350% increase in the number of people heading on boats and heading out of Bangladesh last year. I think there's going to be even a higher percentage, much greater numbers potentially this year because of these conditions. Yes. And remember, all of this is happening to the Rohingya, not because of anything that they've done, but because of who they are and the God who they pray to. That is why they are being attacked and oppressed and are suffering so much because of their identity. So I think it's extremely important that they know that we're with them, that we're going to do everything we can to support them, not only in meeting their immediate needs, but also in creating the conditions that will make what they want more than anything else possible go home, go back to Myanmar as citizens with rights and with security.